Everyone, welcome in. Betsperts Golf here for our first look at the 2025 RBC Canadian Open. Coming off of, I guess, what feels inevitable at times, especially if you're betting golf in the outright markets. Memorial showed up, had some teeth, did its thing, and at the end of the day, you get Scotty by margin, which is, feels like sometimes when you're, even betting into the non-Scotty markets, yeah, man, when he's just dialed in and just doesn't make mistakes, Ron, and here we are with, going off shorter than 3-1 next week for Oakmont. But yeah, I don't know how much Memorial you got to watch, but he's really good at the game.
I watched everything yesterday, Saturday. It's such a conundrum because I got away with it last week. I had Griffin at 75-1, and I was like, okay, and you would think, oh well, maybe if it's an easier course, he doesn't play as good on those because he can't separate. But then then he goes and wins Byron Nelson, and then last week, tougher course, so I was like, I'm gonna take my chances. And then this week, you go with the without market with a guy like even a Morikawa, a Schauffele, and I just don't understand some of these guys. Like, I don't know what's going on with Colin, but yeah, I don't know why I'm still even thinking about him at times because, it's just not there. And, a course like that he's had so much success on, you'd think maybe something would click. And he started off so well on Thursday and then just nothing there. So, but yeah, it was just like you always knew it was going to happen once the weekend hit with Scotty. It was just like how much is he going to win by this time? And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting next week with the U.S. Open. I'm interested to see, like, what are you thinking? 350? I don't know if what he's at right now. I haven't looked recently what it's down to, but it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, so I don't really know what to do from a betting standpoint next week in terms of what we need from our job as it requires content and like an article and stuff, because I bet Scotty at 480 in the middle, like on the final round of the PGA. And then this week, I bet into the non-Scotty markets, but then a couple of books will offer parlays. So I took a little bit more Scotty at the US Open and I parlayed it with Memorial pre-tournament, and I grabbed a little bit more live. So I am like double my allotment of a typical standard PGA Tour outright week just on Scotty next week at Oakmont. So at like cumulative, I have Scotty at like plus 570 is kind of what I do the math and check it out. So, I got to do some content. I got to make some picks and share some thoughts on some guys that have a chance at Oakmont. But, I think obviously, we get lost in the hyperbole in the moment when we feel like he's unbeatable. We know that's not the case, but there are just times when like what feels awkward now, and to the point you're kind of making, dancing around like the Colin and Xander discussions, is that, there's definitely a tier of elite golfers. Those guys are in it, but there are just more times than not, where he feels like he can just separate. And in an event where we had 11 guys finish in red numbers and only a handful, I think like 5 guys, shorter than 4 under, he posted 10 under. And even on Saturday, right? Saturday was just par. I'm going to let everyone else kind of stumble, make their mistakes, get out of position, and I'm just going to find fairways, grind par, and then when I get a couple opportunities, and then to close 4 out of 5 as he did on Saturday, with just kind of a mundane start, you'd be like, all right, what's Scotty doing? I just par. It's like, yeah, but look what everyone else is doing. Par is really good out here today, and that's, I think, very much what we feel like we're going to get at Oakmont, where even though it's not a spot where he's familiar with, I feel like there's discussion of like, oh, when it's unpredictable and unfamiliar, like he's uncomfortable in that, and that's what we had at Pinehurst with like the sandy waste areas, and like this feels pretty straightforward at Oakmont. It's going to be really difficult. Be premium and keeping the ball in play off the tee because the rough is going to be so penal. Hitting your spots, like these are the things where he just doesn't deviate from that, right? Rory has a different gear when he can crank it up and get dialed in with the driver and the putter gets hot, and like we see it with these other elites, but there's just something with Scotty where the baseline is so high and he's just so unlikely to put himself and play himself out of position or out of contention, especially when the putter is kind of just, field average and sometimes better as of late. Obviously this year's been great. So yeah, he's going to, I think if you could find over 3 right now, and we look, I mean, I don't know where we're looking at. I don't think there's much over 3 out there in the marketplace for him for the US Open. And that's tough, right? Depending on how you allocate your funds and how you kind of factor out your units, like that's a hard bet to make at 3-1 in a full field in a major championship.
And that's the thing. I'm glad you mentioned it. The putting is, if you go back and look, 11 of his last 13 tournaments, he's positive, and not just positive. Like there's a bunch where he's gaining more than a stroke, and it wasn't like that in the last couple of years. Like he had his spike rounds, of course, but when he adds the consistency, and even when you see his shorter range putting with the claw grip he's kind of using from like that, just looks so locked in right now. And so, I know Oakmont's greens, have a reputation for maybe being the toughest, on the planet. I know they're right up there with Augusta. So, it'll be interesting to see with the putting next week. But I just think, man, if he's got the putting clicking like he does, it's unstoppable. I mean, it just is.
Yeah, this is courtesy of our friends over at Gambly. US Open odds looks like you can get 3-1 currently on Caesars. FanDuel down to 260. So a few books not currently listed here. Maybe they'll update here later in the day. But yeah, I mean, 3-1 on Caesars. Caesars rarely has the best number. It's just really hard. Like this is where it gets tough, is because these guys just aren't long enough. When he's soaking up so much win equity. Looks like they've readjusted here, calling out to 27, which is definitely a move based off of where he's been in the past. That's shifted, I think, post Memorial. Small tier, 8, 9 guys here, 30 or shorter, and Scotty at 3-1, and then you get into your long shots, obviously. So yeah, going to be fascinating next week. I think it's going to be a fantastic golf tournament. I mean, it was really hard last time. They were 2016, I think, when DJ came back and won. Lowry, as we know, Lowry entered with a 4-shot lead, which is very Shane Lowry to enter and have a little bit of Sunday scaries. And I believe DJ won at like 6 or 7 under, but they took on a lot of rain that week, so that course actually was playing softer.
Very soft. Yep.
Yeah, so like we haven't had it in a while, but I think we're definitely going to be in a range of like par being a very, very, very good score for Oakmont next week. So excited for that. But for now, when we get into a little bit more unknown, is Canadian Open. New course. Has been jumping around for a handful of years. TPC Toronto. Ron's preview is up on the site. Highly recommend people check that out. I know the Canadians in our life, a lot of Canadians in the golf content space are bemoaning the fact that this is nowhere near Canada or nowhere near Toronto, very much outside. But it seems like, I believe we're coming here again next year. And depending on how that goes, this could be more of a staple event in terms of where we see the Canadian Open based off of, I think like the Canadian, they're moving their headquarters here. So there's definitely some, leans here where this could be, if it goes well, kind of the home for this for the next few years based off of some of that news. But it's been bouncing around, some more of the, older style, closer to the city courses. But big course, Ron, par 70, 7,300, almost 7,400 yards from the tips. Again, very similar to the layout and distance that we have at Oakmont. I know the Canadian has made its way by kind of trying to mimic and get people ready for the US Open in terms of growing out the rough and trying to make it play as hard as they can. Kind of give us a little bit flying blind, but I think you did a great job in your preview here. Tell us what we need to know about the TPC Toronto.
Like you said, it's a long course. If you would rank it among, PGA Tour courses that are played every year, it'd be the 5th longest course overall. So it kind of is longer than we've seen in past years. In Canada, they've kind of been more shorter courses. But like you said, there is kind of the similarity with, we've got bluegrass rough approaching 4 inches. And so kind of I compare it most to Oakdale from a couple of years ago, and even St. George's a little bit, even though those are more, St. George especially is more of a classical type course. This is like this is more of a wide open, expansive. We've got 37-yard wide fairways. There's just tons of room off the tee, and part of that is, obviously it's going to a huge favor to distance this week. But part of that also is there's just a lack of hazards. There's only 3 holes with water. Now, what they did do, there was a renovation here a couple of years ago, and they basically redid all the bunkers and put them in varying spots on the fairway, trying to make it harder off the tee. As far as, there's some bunkers at 320, there's some at 310, there's some around 300. So the goal was to try to force players to make a decision off the tee, either to lay up or, I'm pretty sure guys like Rory, I don't really see how even, bunkers at 320, like he can still get over those easily. So it's going to be interesting to see what he takes on this week. But yeah, it's kind of a bombs away off the tee. And, we've seen rough like this before. So, I don't think that's going to really limit these guys as far as their decision-making. The green complexes, everything I've seen is that they're very vanilla. They're very flat. Some of the greens are elevated, but I think just looking down from approach to, around the green to putting, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a huge challenge. So, I mean, just in general, I'm thinking even somewhere around 20 under seems like it's very possible this week. I know because of how wide open, like it's a parkland course, but there's parts of it that are fairly open to the wind. And so, I know if we get some wind, that obviously will change. But yeah, other than that, I think there's some good course comps. I think, I've got some listed here. I think Detroit, and it's kind of very similar to kind of some of the northern courses here in the U.S. Even like a Wilmington Country Club, a Valhalla from last year. I think there's some characteristics that kind of match with that because you got the bent POA on the greens. But yeah, overall for me, I'm kind of looking at, guys who have distance off the tee. I think there's going to be, you got some of these par 4s. I think there's 5 of them that are over 500 yards. So they really lengthen these holes out to try to make it tougher from a distance standpoint. So I think long irons, looking at maybe even 200 plus. And then just guys who can get hot on the greens. I think it's going to be similar to some weeks we've had in the past, even like a TPC Craig Rancherie. I don't know if it's going to be that easy. That's the part I'm trying to figure out still. But I'm expecting these guys to, especially if the wind is down, to be able to go pretty low this week.
Yeah, the wind's going to be a big piece too. Yeah, you bookend par 5s. You have a, par 5 to start, par 5 to finish. If you are, starting off a 1, and you see some of the distance here, a couple of par 3s that are a little bit longer, but a couple of par 3s that are a little bit shorter too, right? The 4th hole, 158. You see the 14th playing at 144. So a lot of this distance is tied up into some big par 4s. So, longer par 70 tracks, I think, are pretty good comps for what we're looking at this week. So, yeah, it's interesting. I didn't think it was going to play that easy based off of, previous Canadian Opens. But we also, that's the trouble with moving courses is that we just don't have an understanding until we see it yet. And depending on, like you said, I think the wind can play a pretty massive factor. Yeah, the rough is going to be grown out. Boy, you're talking 37-yard fairways. Like, yeah, you almost land a plane on some of these, right? Like those are pretty wide fairways for these guys. So, yeah, definitely going to be interesting. It makes the handicap a little bit trickier with this field. So, yeah, showing a little bit of Ron's preview here, showing the official scorecard here, and some of the course features, as you mentioned here, would be the 5th longest. There's some elevation changes here, good amount of bunkering, but not a lot of water either, right? So in terms of penalty off the tee when you miss outside of the rough, which is probably going to touch 4 by the time we get to the weekend, guys are going to be able to have some longer approach shots in here. And doesn't necessarily, we've seen this in the past, like distance alone is not necessarily enough. And the greens are kind of middle of the pack too, so it's not like some real treacherous, small, tiny greens that they're firing in from, 190 plus or anything like that. So maybe some comp courses, some difficult par 70s, I think are a good way to look at it. It's like the odds board here. As you mentioned, decent field for a Canadian Open. It's not a this is not a signature event field, but relative to where you are typically in this spot in the schedule, really tough spot, right? We're coming off of a signature event. We got a major championship the next week, and we got a signature event right behind it. So, guys like, Ludwig coming, Connors, Lowry, Mac, like a lot of these guys at the top of the boards, 4 straight weeks for them. It kind of makes sense why Rory, would skip to try to rest a little bit here. But Rory coming back has had a lot of success at the Canadian Open, had a lot of success doing it at different courses. It's just, interesting to see. 450 is the best number on Rory at the top of the board here, especially if distance is going to matter. Kind of understand why he's soaking that up. Ludwig, nice Sunday for Ludwig to close and make you feel a little bit, I don't know if you get a little bit of positive on Ludwig momentum. 20 on Corey. I was on Corey big time last week. Thought it was a great setup for him. Not great. Shane Lowry, Bobby Mack here to defend his title. Sam Burns, Sunjay, Pendrith at 35. Luke Clinton, official PGA Tour debut after a fantastic run at Florida State. 35 is really short for Luke Clinton, someone that I would love to back, but 35 is a tough hill to climb. We'll see. Keith Mitchell, Harry Hall, Matt Hughes, a lot of Euros. But Thorborg Olsen, impossible to bet Wyndham Clark at 50 right now. He seems absolutely lost in the wilderness. I'm not sure what's going on with Wyndham. So a lot of Euros and a lot of Canadians here. Decent field. Like, again, this is not a field of nothing but jabronis. Like, there's win equity here and some talent in this field. So pretty decent field for the week, depending on, especially considering where it is in the schedule. So,
yeah, and I think you can always tell which of the main golfers, the top golfers that are here, and you look at what kind of game they have. And so you see guys like, Aberg and Burns and Clark and Homa, Bobby McIntyre, Sung J M. These are all guys who are strong off the tee. And so, obviously they looked at this ahead of time and they see the length and they say, okay, well, this is a course I can bomb it off the tee. So I think that's another clue, maybe a minor thing to look at, but just something I always look at, with guys who think they fit the style of the course. And so that can kind of confirm some things for me as far as how the course will play. And so I think some of those guys that you just named too, even a guy like Thor off the tee, he'll have some good holes to bomb it on. And so I think, and I will say this, Taylor Pendrith is the one guy, and I'm sure most of the Canadians have played this course at some time or another, but apparently Pendrith has played this course like over 50 times. So if you're looking for a guy, and we know this doesn't always work out because we've seen this happen where guys on their home course, it just doesn't matter that much, but he is someone who probably definitely for sure has the most experience here.
Yeah, no, it's a good call out. We had last week or a couple weeks ago, right? It was Sam Stevens at the Colonial was his like home course, and he struggled. They'll soup it up differently than we typically see. The routing will be different, and I believe there's some routing changes here too, based off of what the standard. If you were playing this just kind of normally, shout out to Sam. Appreciate that. If you're watching live, hit the thumbs up, help the guys out. We appreciate that. BetSports Golf here on the YouTube channel, BetSports Golf in podcast form, wherever you listen to podcasts. Monday and Tuesday shows always. Follow us on Twitter at BetSports Golf. Lots of Ron's pumping out content there all the time, along with on his Twitter feed. I do a couple videos a week to try to share some of the rabbit hole stuff with you too. This is a difficult rabbit hole week, simply because we typically like to share the course. Not necessarily a difficult rabbit hole week, but we typically like to share the course specifically. We can't really share the course because we don't have any reps at TPC Toronto, so we don't know necessarily what to expect. But comp courses, Toronto's Point has got a list of them, in his preview here, and you can look at also different par 70 tracks depending on what you think the scoring is going to be. You can play around with it. If you just kind of, I feel like when there's unknown new courses, in my opinion, both from an outright standpoint and a DFS standpoint, there's two ways you can go about it. You can basically pick a lane and say, I think it's going to play like this. I think it's going to be a Bombers week. I'm going to fill my card in my player pool with distance guys. Or I don't know what I don't know, so I'm going to spread it a little bit. I'm going to mix some Bombers in here. I'm going to just find a number that I like with a different guy. And then I'm going to find maybe a shorter guy or two. Maybe I'm going to put a premium on a particular skill, and you kind of hedge where you maybe, depending on how it plays, you have multiple outs. So I think this is another great example. We had a lot of this in like the COVID era when we were kind of mixing courses and seeing some courses we didn't see, and they were playing at different times of the year and such. So I kind of lean with Ron. I think based off of what Ron's write-up has and what Ron's saying today, probably Bombers more than anything. Ron, is that kind of where you're kind of leaning?
Yeah, Bombers, long iron players. And I think, the greens are very simple. And so, I don't think we need you have to have a Sam Burns who's going to have this great putting skill. I think just looking at the rabbit hole, I think that's an interesting thing to look at is the floor ceiling, looking at some of the ceiling putters. I think a good point you made earlier was the one thing that could keep scoring down is this is a par 70. And so when I'm looking at my course list page right now, most of the par 70s, even though they would play easier if they were par 72s, it does tend to keep scoring down. So I may have been a little high with my minus 20, maybe 15 under, maybe a little better. But even if you look at a course like 2 years ago here at Oakdale, so it was very difficult off the fairways. Fairways were much more narrow, rough similar, but Nick Taylor won at 17 under. And so, I think this is going to play easier than Oakdale. So what that will be at, we'll see how the week goes. But I think looking at par 70s, looking at the comp courses, I think that's a great way to build this week is to, take some of those and build like a little mini model with those as well.
Yeah, good comp course week. Let's see this. I want to see how many par 70s will stretch out to a longer time frame here. 6 months, not going to get it done. We'll look at the past couple of years and see if we get a decent sample of guys. It's going to be tricky because, again, you're going to get a lot of small sample Canadians. You might get some small sample Euros. We only got one round here in the last 6 months, or one event that would qualify. So we're not going to get a lot of this small sample. What's the Ludwig event that counts here? It's not a lot of very long par 70. So just the U.S. Open. Just interesting to see. Yeah. So if you ever want to see what, you do some condition filtering here and you want to see what the actual rounds that are getting counted in the sample, you can click on this blue number here and actually take you into a different page and show you what the actual events are. If we go back 3 years, and again, you can also use the minimum round feature to turn off small sample stuff for some guys. Last 3 years, 32-ish rounds. You can see here what's with the Rory sample. Again, not a lot here. So
you could even, I would even throw an average with long just to take out the short courses. Cause when I'm looking at my sheet right now and there's like Colonial, they just played is average.
Yeah.
So I think that would probably give you more sample that you're looking for.
I'll just fill that out. Take away the shorties. All right. Rory's. Let me do this here. Yeah, this is tricky. And again, this is, it makes it for an interesting week. So finding edges through the data is going to be really, really helpful. Rory, let me see the average here. See how much he's separating by relative to the odds. He's obviously separating pretty massively, and he is here too. And that would make sense. Rory over 2 strokes per round over the last 3 years on basically average to long par 70s. Toasty is going to get a lot of that's Houston for Toasty. It's popped there twice. Ludwig, just a smaller sample. Wyndham, Tom Kim, Lowry, Trey Mullinex, name you would not expect on a very small sample. Bobby Mack, Nicholas Norgard, Woodland. Again, Woodland popped nicely again in Houston. That's where he showed really well. Thomas Dietrich. That's interesting. He's almost flat. I was going to say, you typically get a little red sprinkled in the middle here on Dietrich, and the putting's doing a lot. Putting's still doing a lot of work here, but he's at least flat. Matty Schmidt, real small sample. Luke Clanton's is what we would expect. Again, literal 4 rounds. This is a tough way. You might be better off with comp courses this week to get at least a little bit of a bigger sample here.
And these are all strong off the tee players. Maybe minus Tom Kim. These are so I think that's a pretty common theme you're going to see.
Tom Kim added some distance, but it's not great here. So let's look at some of your comp courses here. Let me pull up your list here. You did have Oakdale. So we'll see. We'll get some previous Canadian Open. Let's just see what we get here.
Oakdale and then Detroit, St. George.
And what's my? Yep, here we go.
The bottom, yeah, Valhalla. And I think Wilmington's a good comp. I think Cricket Club, Philadelphia Cricket Club was just here. We just saw that one. It's a little bit shorter, but it's a par 70, very similar. I think for me, TPC Deer Run, because you have I think it's going to play easier. You have thicker rough, just like Deer Run does. I think TPC Boston would be my other one here. I'd go with.
All right, let's see what we get. Back out our sample. Another way to go about it this week, right? This is the beauty of the rabbit hole is you got a lot of options, a lot of ways to find the information that we need. Any edges? I think could have a good week of good groupthink, but I think we're going to fall into some groupthink, and pushing back on that is a good way to do it. So this is the sample's giving us even less data, which is interesting. Because some of these guys aren't playing all these courses. And again, we're getting, a lot of mix of random Euros here. Rory still at the top. But again, we have a lot of guys right around 20, 25 rounds, which is tricky. You can go back longer. I'm at 3 years now. Clanton, nice 8 rounds on the course that we have. I believe that is TBC Deer Run. Yep. And Rocket Mortgage. So if it is playing real soft to Ron's point, we're going to 20 under. That makes a lot of sense. Again, I'm very bullish long-term on Luke Clanton. But you got to get a bettable number at the top. 35 is tough. Let's see. Rory, Hayden Springer, again, 8 rounds. Here's Justin Rose, Shane Lowry. Again, all these guys are on pretty small-ish samples. But again, some, good drivers of the golf ball, guys that can gain off the tee. Springer's got a lot of distance. Lowry's going to gain through fairways. Rico does a little bit of both. Connors has been doing a little bit of both this year. I can see Taylor Moore here. Cam Young's been playing better, Ron. I'm not a Cam Young guy. Like, I'm not sucked into historical Cam Young stuff, but playing better golf. The number's pretty big.
Now, he's one of the ones playing 36 holes today, so he's qualifying for the U.S. Open. So what is your take? Do you think that impacts their prep week for, especially a new course like this?
It does on a new course. Yeah, to Ron's point, if you're not familiar, it is golf's longest day. There are multiple U.S. Open qualifiers happening all over the country. Jersey, North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, Canada. So there's, one in Canada, which I'm assuming is where he's going to be. Yeah, they're all over the place. So it's your last chance to punch your ticket to the U.S. Open if you have not already done so. So there will be a handful of guys in the event here that are part of that today, trying to get themselves in. So usually, Golf Channel, great coverage on this, some really great stories. So if you are a golf sicko like us, I recommend tuning in this afternoon, late in the day. The twilight hour, you'll get a lot of results and some stuff that's going on. So yeah, it probably impacts it a little bit. But also you can make the case that if he punches his ticket, that momentum heading in, that the adrenaline from coming there probably could help you too. So it's hard to quantify what it could do, but yeah, he's playing better. If we kind of look at, recent Cam, it's not great, but the results have been a little bit better. He gained off the tee more. Yeah. Last couple times out, this isn't great at the truest off the tee, but the approach game was better. He's just we're going to line it up a little bit more, but the putting has been a little bit better too. It's actually been doing a little bit more of the lifting. Again, this is not electric results, but it's better. And I'm not a Cam Young guy, but now we're up to like 80. And he's, a spot where distance might matter. So I'm going to flirt with Cam Young this week. I'm not quite sure what to do with it. You do a little bit more research. I would like to see him pop here in a, some sort of comp or some sort of rabbit hole situation where I'm getting a little bit more confirmation bias, but it's going to be hard to do because none of the results lately for him have been particularly well. So the data is not going to show, because if you go back up here and do any of this, this was just a lot of red to feel good about, long, very long, difficult. None of this is like, yeah, I'm going to give you my money.
Yeah, you'd have to extend that out a little longer to get some green in there.
Yeah, like 4 years.
Yeah, we've seen it. It just hasn't been recently.
Yeah. Yeah, here.
Yeah, there you
Warriors.
go.
It's good.
Yeah.
Right? This is why people still do it, because that's bright green. This is all pretty nice. So you shorten the last year and it looks a lot different. So here we are. Doesn't matter. Hey, long, very long. Nope. Doesn't matter. So yeah, it's a tricky week. What other things do you want to look at here? Reset this.
I think the usual typical, and it kind of goes with the long courses, but I'm looking at definitely driver heavy this week. I don't see many holes where they're actually going to lay up. I don't think those bunkers in the landing zones are going to have much of an impact. I know Ian Andrew, who did the renovation, kind of claims that if you get in the bunker, it's going to be tough to get out of some of them, but I don't see it. So I know they are a little bit deeper than average, but I don't think that's really going to scare some of these guys away from how they hit their tee shots. So definitely looking at driver heavy, and then probably long irons would be my other thing when we're done with this, looking at 200 plus.
So this is the last calendar year. Off the tee, driver heavy, strokes gained, ball striking, separating a little bit. So again, this is tough because like Roy's playing on significantly different golf courses, and then some of these guys he's playing obviously against different fields. So strokes gained is going to be relative to fields. Search by strokes gained total, just bringing obviously putting into a little bit. You can see Rory here, Sam Burns, Harry Hall, Corey Connors, Luke Clanton. Them really with a driver heavy piece, in my opinion, trying to capture really ball striking off the tee, really where guys can separate. So here's Kurt Kitayama at the top. There's more positive Clanton sentiment. Small sample still. Doug Gim, Nicholas Norgard popping again, Antoine Rosner, Nick Hardy, Roy McIlroy, Joel Damon, Kevin Yu, Keith Mitchell, Lee Hodges. There's Pendrith, Isaiah Salinda, Connors again. Ricky Castillo's playing pretty good golf most of the last little bit. There's Toasty again. So again, good mix of distance, as you would expect. Svensson gets it out there. We know Ludwig does. The Højgaards do. Woodland does. So to Ron's point, distance is probably a good lean and good way to look this week. You said long irons too.
Yeah, look at overall. Go to overall approach, and it does combine fairway and rough. But I think this is the best view just for if you want just a quick general overview. You got 50-yard buckets here.
Yeah, I would expect we would have a lot from, especially when you look at that scorecard, the way it's going to break down. You're going to have a lot of approaches from 200 plus here. Aaron Wise is in the field. Yes, I'm in. What's my boy doing? I have to look at how the Corn Ferry's been going for Aaron Wise, but I've not wasted money on him in a very long time.
I missed that one. That's interesting.
Yeah, love it. All right, small sample for some of these guys. David Ford, maybe a guy we start talking about soon. I'm not sure which Haskins Award. I'm not sure which one he just won. Johnny Kiefer too. Johnny Kiefer's been playing some really good golf on the Corn Ferry Tour. David Ford is a young one of the, I believe he's been the number one ranked player on the the NCAAs here for the last little bit. So some young studs here in the top: Thor, Ludwig, Clanton, Ford, Kiefer. Interesting list of names here. All right, jumps out to us. Thor, name you called out. Decent sample here of overall proximity from 200 plus. Mac Meisner, Nick Hardy, Matty Schmidt, Kevin Roy, Chandler Phillips. So again, a lot of solid distance guys, which would make a ton of sense. Anyone that sees a bigger sample that's been really struggling here. How about Brandt Snedeker at the Memorial with an absolute insane top 10? I think he finished top 10. He was the 7 under.
Yeah, 7. Yeah, finished 7th. Yep. 9
birdies. Absolutely crazy. Even seeing him in the field on a invite was like, what are we doing with Sneds? Your 2026 President's Cup captain getting in there and backdoors a top 10. Golf's a crazy game. Bo Hostler does not suit him well here. Let's see. Bryce Garnett. Do you get any nostalgia for Mike Weir? Leave it alone. Home has not been good from this distance, but again, this is a decent larger sample. Recent Homa stuff's been good. Svensson might pop well on some stuff because he hits it so long. Longer irons have not been great. Mullinex we saw earlier look good. Mac Hughes. So just kind of looking at some guys that struggle in this distance as well. Tigala, it's been rough. So some names to cross off. That's part of the venture this week too, I think, is just finding ways to cross some guys off.
Yeah, agreed.
Bryce Garnett keeps coming up here for criminal. I don't know what you're doing, but
yeah, this is not his. He's a much more play him if it's a shorter course, easier conditions. He has popped a few times in some of these. I don't think he's played in a ton of signature events, but I think this field is much better for him, but not sure if the course fit is the best for him this week.
Yeah. All right, buddy. Anything else before we wrap?
No, just if you have a rabbit hole, it's a great week to mess around with some of the different, floor ceiling filters, even finish position, looking at, easier courses, longer courses. There's so much you can get into with the finish position data as well. So it's a good week to get creative.
Yeah. And again, you can look at some of the things that other people are doing. You can go into the View Expert Model section. Here's Andy Lack, Inside Sports Network. He's got his first run here. John Hasselbauer, PGA tout. His model for the Canadian is up. So you want to get a sense of what other people are doing. What stats are they weighing heavily? You can go ahead and do that. And again, if you happen to be, really proficient in some of these things, you can download any of these categories or other models into a CSV, and you can, put them in the CSV and Excel and weigh them differently and create your own model from other people's models and just kind of use the wisdom of the crowd. On a week like this might be a decent way to go about it. So I appreciate you hanging out with us. Again, shout out to Sam, as you mentioned, thumbs up before you take off. Subscribe. Again, BetSports Golf. Or if you listen to podcast, BetSports Golf here on the YouTube channel, and then on Twitter at BetSports Golf. Check out Ron's preview. Again, on the site, first page, great ways to access the site for really cheap. BetMGM, drafters, really cheap deals that we have right now. The best deals you're going to find all year round. So continue to add new stuff. Ron's been continuing to work on a list of things you've requested. So if you are a subscriber and you have some things you want to see, let us know. Maybe it's something we're already working on. Maybe it's something that we haven't thought of that we can do. Let us know. We're going to make sure we try to make sure this is the best thing out there for you to do all your research for any PGA Tour event. So for Ron, I'm Ryan. We'll see you all next time. Thanks, everyone.